Greetings. It's Monday, May the 5th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Well, we're going to start off with something that affects all of us, and that's economics. The trade situation between the United States and the rest of the world continues to be, well, a little unstable and a little contentious and a little bit unknown. But what we are seeing is not an end of the world scenario where everything's going to collapse into a Planet of the Apes-like existence. No, what we're seeing is a reshuffling of resources and priorities. Now, there's lots of nonsense in the mainstream media, more than usual, and that says something. I keep shaking my head every time I check out some of these stories on YouTube and elsewhere about these so-called experts ready to pull their hair out of their, well-made-up heads. Didn't these guys in the reporting game ever learn how to learn? Really? I mean, most of our job used to be research, real research, and I'll go into that in a minute. Port traffic in the United States is down 15 to 35%, depending on which port you're talking about. That's not a surprise given the situation, but it's not as bad as leading to a total depression. Much of the drop, of course, is from China, which is also not surprising, but not all trade from China has stopped. That's just not true. Now, 15 to 35% reduction in overall traffic, depending on the port, that's not as much as a lot of people were predicting. Now, this will affect people working in transportation, people that drive trucks, people that work at ports, people that load cargo containers or unload them. But products are still moving, although they will be more expensive in many cases and maybe not as plentiful as we are used to. So when you go to a Walmart or some other Target or something like that, you probably won't see 100 little dolls made in China. You might see 5 or 6. Perish the thought. Now, this whole trade thing is going to affect smaller companies more than big ones. Of course, that's just the way it goes. That will be sad, but there's no surprise there. Far fewer small companies will vanish as a result of these tariffs than were destroyed during the COVID lockdown. But basically, people, this will affect the choice of products you'll be seeing on store shelves, but you will not see Soviet-style shortages. At least not with most things. An important consideration that is lost on most people is that governments do all sorts of things that affect the flow of commerce all the time. Some of it is wrenching. Much of it's not, but it's ongoing, it's constant, and it's been going on for centuries. There's a theory that Japan was actually settled by Chinese merchants who wanted to grow silk to sell to the Roman Empire and wanted to beat the tariffs that were imposed by the imperial Chinese court back in the day. So it's always been a game of cat and mouse in the business world. Nothing new there. This is especially true with international commerce. These companies, these shipping companies, these trading companies, these manufacturing companies, they're not going to sit down, crawl into a ball, and just die while they're whimpering. People in the trade business don't work that way. They never have and they never will. Getting around what governments do is what they're best at. The same thing with manufacturing. Adaptation and quick thinking is the key to survival. For want of a better thing to say, the free market works. It really does. In terms of American manufacturing potential, I've done a fair amount of research. Yes, real research. That means calling people up who know and asking them questions. And there's plenty of unused factories out there that are sitting dormant, derelict in many cases, but repairable. The United States could get back to making stuff relatively quickly if the desire and the capital are there. Those are the questions. Also, if we want to see the U.S. involved with as much pollution as we used to, or if people are even willing to work at factories. There's an awful lot there, and that will probably be the subject of a special report I'm currently working on. But let's just go back to a major important factor here. The United States is not a socialist country, at least not yet. Businesses are going to keep going. Some may fail, but many won't. The same thing goes for China. Even during World War II, with all of its global shortages, things moved around and business got done. German soldiers were still drinking coffee. Not easy to get to them at those times. The world could explode and commerce can still go back then. What does that tell you for today? Things may not be the same when all the dust settles after this tariff war, but the landscape will still be more or less what we're used to. Don't panic unless there's reason to panic, because the people who are reporting all of the end-of-the-world scenarios are there to get your attention. Ratings, clickbait, very few people are listened to if they're telling you the truth. And I speak from some experience. Now, to other socialist thinking, Canada and its election last week. Yes, guess what? The globalist candidate won. You know that guy who worked in the finance world and never really lived in Canada? That's no big surprise. At least it shouldn't be a big surprise. I was once told by a Canadian friend that while Americans like to think of themselves as believing in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Canadians, on the other hand, believe in peace, quiet, and stasis. They don't like anything to change. Americans think very differently than our neighbors to the north, at least in most of the provinces. The ones out west, with all the oil wells and minerals and things like that, that could be different. The political situation in Alberta, British Columbia, and the Yukon, of all places, now that would be worth following. They are funding much of the socialist state that the eastern side of Canada is enjoying. And, well, when it all comes down to money, it comes down to money. Oh, the indictments and prosecutions pertaining to the customers of the late Jeffrey Epstein and his crime gang, not happened, not yet. The powers that be are hoping you'll forget about it all, which is how the bad guys always win in the end. They bet on the average American's attention span and lifestyle interest, more concern about their living standards than what's right or wrong in this country. So they're just gonna wait you guys out. No one's sending letters to the Trump administration saying, we want Epstein investigated. We want all those criminals, some of whom might be your friends, Mr. Trump, to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. The list, by the way, has been out the last week or so, what should be more properly called Epstein's friends or contact list. It was unsealed by a judge. And there's no surprises, of course. Donald Trump's name is on the list, as is Bill Clinton's, Hillary Clinton's, and Michael Jackson's, among many others. What will matter will be an investigation into some of these people, and if wrongdoing is discovered, putting them on trial, finding them guilty, and locking them up. But honestly, I'm not holding my breath. Oh, and speaking of suspected blackmail, Congresswoman Marjorie Greene has withdrawn a proposed bill in the House of Representatives that would have allowed for the prosecution of anyone organizing or participating in a boycott of Israel to be punished with up to $1 million in fines and 20 years in federal prison. Wow. Boycotting the goods and services of a foreign country like Israel would have been worse than robbery, sexual assault, or murder in many cases, at least as far as punishment goes. Yeah, even in a country under the influence of Israel, like the United States currently is, that would have been a very hard law to swallow. But what is most disturbing are the people and organizations that were supporting it quite actively. Check it out, really. Check it out and see who was behind all this and how much support they were throwing behind it, and apparently money. House Resolution H.R. 867. H.R. 867. You can read it up on the website, congress.gov. Download it. You can get it in a PDF file. I predict we haven't heard the last of this sort of proposed legislation as the Trump administration and its pro-Israeli stance continues to march on. Oh, and speaking of the Trump administration, not the Babylon Bee department. Really, this is real. President Trump wants to reopen Alcatraz as a prison. You know, the one in the middle of San Francisco Bay that everyone goes to when they take a tourist trip to the Bay Area. Yeah, this is real. Kind of like digging up Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday to solve today's crime-fighting problems, but, well, the clown show seems to still be on in Washington, D.C. Oh, and Alcatraz has been closed since the Kennedy administration, back when I was a baby. And it was closed because it was not efficient or cost-effective. It was considered even a bit cruel because, well, if you've ever seen San Francisco fog and having that stuff come through your cell windows in the middle of the night, that's pretty, wow. That's like something out of a horror movie. Besides, it's a pretty popular tourist attraction these days. It actually makes money for that city that likes to throw it away so easily. This was pointed out by Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, who represents the San Francisco area in the U.S. Congress. I never thought I'd live to see the day I'd agree with anything that woman would have to say, but I guess will wonders never cease? It'll be interesting to see how that goes, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to just say, no, that's not practical. It wasn't practical 60 years ago to keep it open. I don't think it'll be practical anymore. Now, on to what I call the wars room. Ukraine and Russia still going, Israel and Gaza still going, the U.S. and Yemen still going, Israel and Iran with maybe the U.S. joining in, not yet, India and Pakistan not yet, and may soon be off the board. China and Taiwan not really happening and probably won't. Now, in closing, I'd like to address an issue that is spreading like wildfire throughout the all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful internet, namely what is being called the Battle of Shiloh. I'm referring, of course, to a single mother named Shiloh Hendricks of Minnesota who was caught using a racial slur against a very large alleged 5-year-old black kid who she claims was stealing out of her diaper bag at a playground she was at with her kid. And for some reason, a Somali immigrant with an interesting history with law enforcement pertaining to children happened to be by himself at that children's playground. Anyways, he caught wind of this and started recording Ms. Hendricks, who was unapologetic. She was angry, pissed off, obviously felt threatened, and used some derogatory terminology. Okay. I'm sure that happens a lot, but when it goes up on the internet, it's an earth-shattering affair. Anyways, she has been vilified as if she'd committed murder or some other heinous crime and was doxxed, means all of her private information was thrown up on the internet. Hackers have gotten into her stuff. But she's also raised nearly $700,000 as of this morning, money that will be used apparently to move away and start a new life elsewhere. It may end up being used for legal fees if the authorities of Minnesota live up to their expectations. The NAACP is jumping in on this, of course, raising money for the kid in question who was called the N-word and calling for Ms. Hendricks to have her children taken away. Oh, my. Really? I'll tell you what, I'll bet you most of the black kids within distance of that playground have a far worse situation at home than her kids do. But hypocrisy doesn't matter. Now, what does this all mean and where can this all go? Well, unfortunately, the internet has a way of spreading things that could spread into real life being what matters. And the thing that is most interesting about this is how much money this woman was able to raise in a few days from apparently around the world. The social funding platform Give, Send, Go is the one that she's using. Of course, GoFundMe never would have touched a white woman in a situation like this, we all know. A lot of money showing up from all over. Now, that's an indication of something that all of us have known for some time, and that is that white people in this country are frustrated, they're angry, they're very, very upset with the way they've been treated. And I'm speaking as someone in that category, someone who's lived all over the world and had friends in dozens of countries, of cultures, of races. And so when you come back to your home country and you're told because of the color of your skin, all the evil of the world is your fault, it can get a little personal. Now, it's one thing to throw up $5, $10, $15, or $14.88, whatever oddball numbers they're throwing up there, to a woman that you're never going to meet and is probably already left the area if she knows what was good for her. But people are saying that she's become a Rosa Parks, someone who has had enough. And that in and of itself is a pretty powerful statement to make. I'll believe that things are going to get nasty when you don't just see money being thrown towards someone like that, but when you start to see dozens of armed men show up at her apartment to guard her as she leaves. Now, at the same time, most of the people in this country of African descent are pretty decent. Really, more than 50. It's hard to tell the gauge of anything like that, but it's always the minority of the minority that causes all the trouble in our world. Do you ever notice that? Most people just want to live in peace, get on with their lives, make a decent living, sit home, chill with your kids, and that sort of thing. But this has the potential of turning into something worse. Now, white people are being screwed over in this country. I don't care what you say, it's the truth. It's wrong, it's got to stop. Bigotry of all kinds has got to stop. At the same time, riots in the streets when something bad happens, and much of the black community goes out and burns down whole sections of cities. That has got to stop. Going out there and making money using race as a means, and I can think of several so-called civil rights leaders who are guilty of that one. None of this is going to go into a good place. Now, what's the danger here? The danger here is that someone is going to not just call a kid something, but pull out a gun or another gun. Now, a lot of black kids are killing white kids in this country. There's plenty of that video on the internet as well. I just see this as possibly fanning the flames of something that could burn us all up. Because like it or not, people are different culturally, racially, ethnically, religiously, but doesn't mean you have to kill each other. The woman used a bad term. Okay. When I was a kid, I couldn't use that word at home, and that was a long time ago. But that's not a reason to try to destroy her life. At the same time, there are people out there who are looking for trouble and want to use the internet to spread that sort of stuff. I've been with friends who were black who were called the N-word by white people, and you know what they did? Nothing. Just called them stupid, ignorant punks and let it be at that. Americans have gotten far too sensitive for their own good. They've gotten far too rude for their own good. They've gotten far too intolerant and far too bigoted. And there are a lot more racists out there who aren't white than are at this point in time. Another truth that has to be pointed out. So, what I would urge people to do, and although I might be just preaching to the wind here, but start to breathe and start acting like adults. Don't look for revolution at the end of a keyboard, folks, because that's not where it's going to happen. Don't start to try to spread anger and hate. That happened in Africa. Remember Rwanda? Heard about the Tutsis and the Hutus and the ones that started killing each other wholesale? You know how that started? That started with some inflammatory words spoken over radio. And people who had lived in the same neighborhood with each other, people who had lived side by side for generations, started pulling out machetes and chopping off each other's heads. Sadly, humans are a little bit too immature for mass media. In fact, we're just celebrating the end of the Second World War, if celebrating could be the proper term to use for it. And much of that war was fought with propaganda. The anger, the hate, and the eventual bloodshed all emanated through the airwaves. So tone it down. Be careful what you wish for, especially if it's violence. You may not like what you get. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends, share with your enemies, and hope they become friends someday. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My handle there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, clown world, the deep state, and bigotry must be destroyed. Good day.